Steve Bannon is Donald Trump's chief strategist. There is, of course, a lot of opposition for exactly that reason. Let's bring in someone who knows Steve Bannon and who formerly represented Breitbart News before cutting ties with the organization earlier this year. President and CEO of Endeavor Strategies, Kurt Bardella, joins us now. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So why should we be so concerned? Why isn't this just, you know, they're bringing in somebody who's not from the mainstream, he's not in the club, and then all the media and the insiders get upset that someone's in there that, you know, isn't someone they really know. Is that what this is about, or do you believe Bannon does represent something that needs to be taken very seriously?
Well, I think that this is really unprecedented, uncharted territory. This isn't what you normally see in administrations and turnovers where they bring in someone that maybe have a little bit of different experience than what we see in Washington, and that's normal. This is something that's completely outside the normal situation. And I think that's what has so many people concerned. It is an unpredictable variable, and it's an unpredictable variable that has the ear of the president, who's the virtual co-White House chief of staff, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
So you worked there as an advisor. You know, you're a PR guy, you're a strategist of different ways to get messaging across. What did you detect in your time working with them for Endeavor where you were like, this is a concern, I don't want to be around this?
Well, that they're, you know, the way that Breitbart operates and the way that Steve operates is they're provocateurs. They are about instigating and disrupting and creating conflict. And I think that when you're in the role of being, again, someone who helps the president run the country, that's not the mentality that you should have. It should be much more reserved and diplomatic and mature. And that's, if you look at the pages of Breitbart, I think that the last word that comes to mind is mature.
Is it just about tactics, or is it about intention and what he believes? Like, what does Steve Bannon believe that people should be worried about?
Well, I think it's the overall worldview that, you know, the United States should be more of an isolationist country, that we should have less partners, we should be doing less in the global community, that we should withdraw and go backwards. And I think what had so many Americans concerned about this election particularly is the idea that the message of we need to go back to the way it was and undo what many would call progress in our country. That has a lot of people very scared and concerned about what that means for them.
Do you believe that this ideology includes feeling that multiculturalism, diversity, respecting minority rights is a problem?
I think the last thing that you think of when you think about Donald Trump and Steve Bannon ideologically is the word respect. You know, these are people who very freely and openly attack anybody who might disagree with them, who attack the free press, who attack standing pillars of our institution, of our democracy, and they want to somehow fundamentally change that. And I think that has a lot of people rightfully very concerned.
So this guy Jared Taylor, who runs the site American Renaissance, it's, you know, a white nationalist site, you know, which is different than white supremacists. People keep confusing those terms. This isn't the KKK we're talking about. This is people who have, you know, either legitimate or illegitimate grievances very often with multiculturalism and the diversity and the browning of America, so to speak. There has been some waffling. Let's put up the full screen. There's been some waffling on some candidates, some of candidates' Trump signature positions. Build the wall, deport illegals, end birthright citizenship. Take a hard look at Muslim immigrants. Exact. I suspect one of Steve Bannon's important functions will be as an anti-waffler. Now, some could say, good. You know, he promised it. He should do it. And that's a tough spot for Trump, right? Because he did talk this talk. And why? What do you see in this? Why should that be a concern for people?
Well, I think when Trump set himself up to be held to a standard that he set during the campaign, it's going to be his words and his rhetoric that he's ultimately going to be measured by his own supporters, by the most passionate alt-right support that he has. That's who's going to hold him accountable. I think Steve is there to ensure that he doesn't waffle on these things. Now, there's a difference in saying something in the beginning, delaying a little bit, and trying to garner some good favor with everybody else before pursuing the agenda he talked about for so long, because I think he's going to ultimately try to do those things. I think right now this is all just posturing.
Do you believe that Steve Bannon would be a force to oppose the respecting of rights for minorities like the LGBTQ community?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think, look at how Breitbart, on the pages of Breitbart, they talk about these communities and minorities and relations and women and the role of women in this country. And that's kind of a playbook, at least, for the type of rhetoric that they're comfortable with. And things, you know, actions always start with words and then turn into something much more serious, much more substantive. And all we have to measure both the incoming president and Steve by are the words from the past and the stories we read on the site that they describe as their go-to place for news.
Last question, maybe the most relevant one. In your experience with this man, Steve Bannon, is it what he really believes, or is this just what has been working for him with this media product of Breitbart and courting that, you know, passionate but small base of people who believe these things? Do you think it's hype and business, or do you think this is who he is?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think one of the real observations is that it's hard to discern where Breitbart ends and where Steve Bannon, the person, begins. And, you know, I've heard stories of people coming out saying, well, he's treated me very well. I'm Jewish, and he's respected me.
Navy officer, worked at Goldman Sachs, you know, he's done a lot of legitimate things.
He's done a lot of things. And so, again, I think that how you treat one individual person who might be from a specific subgroup, that doesn't necessarily speak to your overall worldview either. And all we have to judge by, again, are the things that we've seen promulgated by this news site. And that's what he's being judged by, and that's probably appropriate given the role that he's played there at the top of that situation.
And it is right to put news in quotes when talking about that site. Kurt Bardella, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, so what